1.2 million copies. That's the number of units Undisputed, an indie boxing game, sold in its first month. And that's pretty impressive for a genre many thought were down for the count. And get this, it's got EA, you know, the former king of the ring, scrambling to get back into the game. But how do we get here? I mean, boxing games went from ruling the world to becoming a forgotten relic, only to come back swinging eventually. Well, we're about to break down the highs and lows of boxing games, plus I'll share my impressions of Undisputed's gameplay, and by the end of this, you might be ready to throw some virtual punches yourself. Let's be real, boxing isn't just a sport. It's a cultural phenomenon that's been shaping our world well over a century. From the grimy underground clubs of the early 1900s to the glitzy Vegas showdowns of today, the sweet science has always packed a punch well beyond the ring. I mean, think about it. When Muhammad Ali refused to step into the ring for the Vietnam draft, it wasn't just about boxing. It was a pivotal moment in the civil rights movement. Or how about when Mike Tyson bit Evander Holyfield's ear? That wasn't just a boxing scandal, it was water cooler talk for weeks. Boxing has always been more than just two people exchanging fisticuffs. Yes, it is a sport, but there's always been heavy themes of race, class, politics, and the raw human drama that we all love. But let's talk about the golden age of boxing. I'd argue that spans from about the 1960s to the 1990s. This is when boxing was a premier combat sport. You had larger-than-life characters like Ali, Frazier, Foreman, Sugar Ray Leonard, Roberto Duran, Marvin Hagler, Tommy Hearns. I mean, the list goes on. And these guys weren't just athletes, they were superstars. Every big fight was an event. People would pack into bars and socialize over beer and wings. I mean, you had family and friends who would crowd around televisions after shelling out big bucks for the pay-per-views, because this was before StreamEast existed. You know, a platform so good, even LeBron uses it.
Oh my God, what is that? Oh my God, what is that?
And it wasn't just about the top guys either. I mean, this sport had depth at the time. You had compelling storylines and fierce rivalries at every weight class. And that depth, it would cause fierce discussions around dinner tables, debates, and barbershops. It would even occupy prime real estate across numerous newspapers. For a lot of people, especially in working class neighborhoods, boxing was more than just entertainment. It was a way out. It was a path to glory and respect. Now, here's where it gets interesting. While boxing was captivating the world in real life, the video game industry was just starting to flex its muscles. And let me tell you, it didn't take long for developers to realize that boxing in video games was just a match made in heaven. I mean, think about it. Boxing is perfect for video game adaptation. It's one-on-one combat with clear rules and objectives. You got a limited number of moves that can be easily mapped to controller buttons. The confined space of a boxing ring translates perfectly to a 2D or 3D game environment. Plus, the sport's built-in progression system of working your way up from nobody to champion, that's basically a ready-made career mode right there. But it goes deeper than just mechanics. I mean, boxing games let people step into the shoes of their heroes. You weren't just watching Ali float like a butterfly and sting like a bee. Now you could be Ali. You could be Tyson or whoever was your favorite fighter. That's powerful stuff. I mean, it provided an escape and an opportunity for people who dreamed of being the champ, but maybe didn't have the means or chance to pursue boxing in real life. And let's not forget the visual appeal. Boxing's one-on-one nature means developers could focus on creating detailed character models and animation. As graphics improved, so did the ability to recreate the sweat, blood, and brutal impact of a boxing match. It's no wonder that boxing games have often been at the forefront of pushing console hardware to its limits. So yeah, when you combine boxing's cultural impact, its perfect fit of game mechanics, and its visual potential, it's no surprise that developers are eager to step into the ring. Boxing games weren't just a niche, they were about to become a heavyweight contender in the gaming world, and trust me, the knockout blows were just getting started. Picture this, it's the early 80s, neon lights are flashing, arcade cabinets are everywhere, and burgers are only $1.50. That was the era we saw the first commercially successful boxing video game, and its name was Punch-Out! It was released in the arcades, and it managed to garner its own cult-like following due to its unique experience, but because it was mainly in arcades, it kinda did hold the game back. But it was in 1987 that Punch-Out! Became the undisputed king, a cultural phenomenon that had kids skipping homework and adults calling in sick to work. That's because its sequel Mike Tyson Punch-Out! Released, and that foundation the first game provided, it was built upon that tenfold. This one introduced players to the iconic Little Mac. Now, Little Mac was the ultimate underdog who took on the larger-than-life opponents such as Glass Joe, King Hippo, and even Mike Tyson. These weren't just generic boxers. They were characters you loved to hate due to the way that they challenged the player with their unique fighting styles. Everything about this game was better than the previous iteration. The presentation, the larger roster, and the refined gameplay just did it for people. Mike Tyson's Punch-Out! Is one of the earliest games I can think of that adopted the concept of easy to pick up but hard hard to master style of gameplay. I think this game also had the advantage of being purchasable on home consoles and a star like Mike tied to the game. And because of this, the game went on to fly off the shelves. Now, I couldn't find specific unit sales, but I did manage to find a source claiming the game has generated almost $2 billion to date. Punch-Out dominated the 80s, but the 90s, it ushered in a new generation of contenders. Evander Holyfield's Real Deal Boxing hit the Sega Genesis in 1992, and it was no joke. The graphics were a huge step up, realistic fighters, smoother animations, and it felt like you were watching an actual boxing match on TV. I mean, at least for the time. It looks dated now, but to us old heads, this was next gen in the 90s. Then, Sega followed up Holyfield's Real Deal with Greatest Heavyweights 1993. They took everything that worked in Holyfield's game and they cranked it up to 11. The gameplay was faster, it had solid customization, a new tournament mode, and an enhanced taunting system. Plus, the roster was stacked as well, with appearances from legends like Muhammad Ali, Joe Frazier, and Rocky Marciano. For boxing fans, this was another solid game from that era. It's because these games weren't just about better graphics, they were changing how we played boxing games, period. The controls got more complex. They let you throw different types of punches, blocks, and dodges to be more precise. And it wasn't about button mashing anymore. You had to think like a real boxer. The rivalry between these companies was so intense that Sega and Nintendo were going at it like Tommy Hearns and Sugar Ray, each trying to outdo the other with better graphics, bigger rosters, and more realistic gameplay. This competition was pushing the entire genre forward, unlike Madden and 2K in this day and age. But here's the thing, as good as these games were, Sega struggled to match the cultural impact Mike Tyson's Punch-Out had on the world. Hardcore boxing fans, they love these other options from Sega, but the mainstream casual fan had Nintendo as their champ, that's why it sold millions of copies. The bottom line is, the 90s is what someone considered to be a golden age of boxing. We had Punch-Out reigning supreme, Sega came in hot with their realistic takes, and a whole bunch of other contenders trying to make a name for themselves. The genre was evolving at a breakneck pace, and fans were eating it up. But just when we thought we'd seen it all, a new challenger was about to step into the ring, and trust me, this one was going to change the game in ways nobody saw coming.
Let's get ready to rumble!
Left me, baby. Ooh, bit off a piece of my throat. Ah! Cut me, dog. Cut me.
Yeah, boy. 16 outrageous boxers, non-stop verbal assaults, and me, Michael Buffer, ready to rumble boxing.
We cannot talk about the history of boxing games without mentioning one of my low-key favorites called Ready to Rumble. Now, Ready to Rumble turned the genre of boxing games upside down, mainly due to its wildly different approach to gameplay. Picture this, it's 1999, and while everyone is trying to make the most realistic boxing sim possible, Midway Studios decides to step into the ring with something completely different. Ready to Rumble wasn't just another boxing game, it was a wacky knockout punch that left players dazed, confused, and coming back for more, mainly because they prioritized fun over realism. So what made Ready to Rumble so special? For starters, it had a roster of 16 fighters that looked like they stumbled out of a cartoon fever dream. We're talking about boxers with personalities that were bigger than their biceps. Each character had their own special moves, fighting style, and attitude, and it was all led by their own mascot, Afro Thunder. It honestly felt like the devs took the blueprint of the unique characters from Mike Tyson's Punch-Out and they built upon that. But here's the kicker, the game wasn't all just about looks. I mean, the gameplay was tight. It had this unique rumble mode that lets you unleash a flurry of nearly impossible to block punches after landing a few solid hits and building up your meter. It added a layer of strategy to the madness. You weren't just button mashing. Instead, you were setting up your opponent for the ultimate knockdown. My fondest memory of this game was the fact that this sequel, Ready to Rumble Round 2, featured Michael Jackson as a playable character. This was so funny and random to me as a kid, but it was also dope because he was actually a solid fighter who would dance around the ring with some of his signature moves. Mike being in the series is also funny because for the longest time, people close to him claim his voice that he used in public interviews was not his natural voice. He added certain inflections into his voice so he sounded softer, but apparently Mike's natural voice was fairly deep. And you can find tons of celebrities sharing stories about Mike's voice behind the scenes. Matter of fact, here's a clip from T-Pain sharing his story of the time he went over to MJ's house.
The real Michael Jackson voice sound like?
It was between where you think Michael Jackson is and Prince. It was in between that. It was just like, it was kind of like, I don't have a deep voice. Listen, so I think Michael's was like a, so what kind of cartoons do you watch?
Now, why did I mention that bit of info? It's because when I was a kid, I used to think that Midway hired someone else to do MJ's voice in the game. I was under the impression that it was just some crazy knockoff that they hired trying to sound like Michael Jackson, but it turns out that was actually Mike's voice. And if you listen to it in the game, it is a lot deeper compared to his interviews. So now the theory on the internet is Ready to Rumble is one of the only places you can hear Michael Jackson's real voice on wax.
Don't tango with the king of pop.
Now, with the MJ fun facts out of the way, I know what you're thinking. Sounds fun, but did people actually buy this crazy game? Well, let me tell you. Ready to Rumble didn't just sell well, it became a certified hit. This wacky boxing game was a launch title for the Dreamcast, and it sold so well, it eventually earned the Sega All-Stars title. Now, for those of you unaware, Sega All-Stars was the Dreamcast version of PlayStation Hits. In order for your game to make this list, your game needed to be a hit. A hit, sort of like today's sponsor, Factor. Factor makes meeting your nutrition goals easier than ever by delivering fresh, never frozen, dietitian-approved meals right to your doorstep. Their team of gourmet chefs create each meal using only ingredients with integrity to help you feel your best, which is important when training for your next boxing match. Factor takes the stress out of meal planning and it sets you up for success. Skip the grocery store, the prep work, the cooking fatigue, and instead get chef-crafted, dietitian-approved meals delivered right to your door. With over 35 meals to choose from per week, this includes options like keto, calorie smart, vegan, veggie, and more. Skip the overpriced takeout trap. Factor is cheaper and it's more delicious. You get chef-crafted, restaurant-quality meals delivered right to your door, and they're ready to heat and eat in just 2 minutes, which means there's more time for you. My personal favorite thing about Factor is the fact that it's convenient, but it's still tasty. I spend a lot of time writing, producing, and recording these videos, all while streaming 5 times a week. It can be hard to find the time to hit my macros while still being in the gym, but Factor makes it easy. Just pull something out the fridge post-workout and boom, it's ready to go in 2 minutes. And once again, my favorite part is it never feels like a chore to eat Factor meals because they actually taste good. So do me a favor and head on over to factor75.com, or you can click the link below and use code 50Hokage at checkout to get 50% off plus free shipping on your first Factor box. I repeat, that's code 50Hokage at checkout at factor75.com to get 50% off plus free shipping on your first Factor box. Now for PlayStation, you needed to sell at least 1 million units to get the PlayStation Hits title, but for Sega, they took a different approach. Instead, they took several factors in consideration, including sales, the quality of the game, and innovation. It was a carefully curated playlist of games, and if you got that cosign from Sega, you got a special tag on your game case signifying to customers Sega thinks this is a game that best showcased the Dreamcast platform. Ready to Rumble was one of those games. It's because Ready to Rumble's impact went well beyond just sales figures. It showed there was room for a different approach to sports games, something severely needed in today's games market. Before this, most boxing games were just trying to be as serious and realistic as possible, but Ready to Rumble came in and reminded everyone that games are supposed to be, you know, fun. The game's use of motion capture technology for the over-the-top animations was impressive for its time. It made those ridiculous characters move in ways that were both hilarious and oddly believable. And let's not forget about the crowd reactions and the vibrant graphics. It felt like you were part of some bizarre world boxing event where anything could happen. Now, I'm not saying Ready to Rumble was perfect. I mean, critics did point out while it was entertaining, it did lack depth and replay value in comparison to more serious boxing games. But you know what? Sometimes you just need to do a 12-round championship bout in a boxing game. Sometimes you just want to punch the king of pop in his face and laugh about it with your friends. And that's where Ready to Rumble really shined. The multiplayer. This game was made for trash talking your buddies on the couch. It brought that social aspect back to boxing games in a way that the more serious boxing sims had kind of forgotten about. So yeah, Ready to Rumble might have not been the most technically impressive or deepest boxing game out there, but it proved that there was room for different flavors in the genre. It paved the way for developers to think outside the box and to not always take themselves so seriously. But while Ready to Rumble was busy making waves with its unique style, a true heavyweight contender was warming up in the wings. Little did we know, the next big thing in boxing games was about to enter the ring, and it was gonna change everything. Now, I know what you're thinking. Based on that trailer that I just played, you think I'm going to discuss Fight Night, and I am. But before I do, I think it's important to pay homage to where it all began, because Lord knows if I don't touch on Knockout Kings, some old head with a receding hairline is about to hit the dislike button and shout,
Listen, you son of a what the your problem?
Knockout Kings was a series that ran from 1998 to 2003 with annual releases. It featured a large roster of real-life boxers, a career mode, slugfest mode, and motion-captured moves that made it visually the best boxing game on the market at the time. I played one of these, and they were decent games in my opinion, but I think the reason so many people forgot about them is because, in my opinion, at least gameplay-wise, they didn't really push any boundaries, they just looked nice. Knockout Kings was just a good-looking game for its time that gave the most authentic experience you could find, plus there really wasn't much competition. I think that's why the series always received average reviews, with the one standout in the series being Knockout Kings 2001, which had an 81 average on Metacritic. But I do think it's important to mention this series because I do think it laid the foundation to what was to come with its presentation and visuals. And what eventually would come landed, and it landed hard in 2004. That's when EA Sports stepped into the ring with Fight Night 2004 and changed the game entirely. This wasn't just another update, it was a complete overhaul that had everyone doing double takes. It was the spiritual successor Knockout King fans had been waiting for. The big game changer was the total punch control system. Instead of mashing buttons, you used the right analog stick to throw punches. It was like EA found a way to translate actual boxing movements into controller inputs. Suddenly you weren't just playing a boxing game, it actually felt like you were boxing. This new control scheme transformed how players approached the game, forcing them to think strategically and set up combos. It brought a level of authenticity to boxing games that still, in my opinion, hasn't been matched to this day. And let's talk about the graphics for a second. Fight Night 2004 looked insane for its time. The character models were so detailed, you could practically count the sweat beads on their head, and the animations were smooth as butter. When you landed a big hook, you could almost feel the impact. It was like watching ESPN, except for you were in control. But EA wasn't about to rest on their laurels. With each new iteration of Fight Night, they kept pushing the envelope. Fight Night Round 2 introduced the new Cutman minigame, the Haymaker system, clinching, flash knockouts, and more. Fight Night Round 3 introduced a first-person perspective mode called Get in the Ring. Suddenly, you weren't just controlling a boxer, you were the boxer. It wasn't for everyone, but it was intense, and I can respect the fact that EA was at least experimenting with their formula, unlike their games today. Fight Night Round 4 introduced better physics, glancing blows, harshly blocked punches, improved AI, and more, but then came my personal favorite entry in the series, Fight Night Champion. This game took things to a whole new level with its mature storytelling. See, long before Madden, 2K, and FIFA were doing story modes in their sports games, Fight Night had it on lock. We're talking a full-on narrative mode centered around a fictional boxer named Andre Bishop. It had drama, it had grit, and it didn't shy away from the darker aspects of the boxing world. They did a great job of telling a very human story inside of a video game. It was like playing through your own version of a Rocky movie. And still to this day, I hear people talking about that final boss fight with Isaac Frost being challenging yet rewarding. This game came out when I was in high school, so I had a lot more free time on my hands during those days, and I recall spending all my free time at one point playing the online multiplayer to the point that my thumbs started to bruise from flicking the analog stick so much. I wanted to make that top 100 leaderboard in any weight class. I didn't care. I just wanted to make top 100. And guess what? Eventually I did, but I quit because my thumbs, they couldn't take it anymore. So I guess what I'm trying to make clear here is that I loved Fight Night. It was the gold standard for boxing games. Every release was an event, eagerly anticipated by fans and critics alike. EA had managed to capture the essence of boxing, the strategy, the physicality, the drama, and translate it into a video game format that was both accessible and deep. But you know what they say about being on top. There's nowhere to go but down. And despite its massive success, storm clouds were gathering on the horizon for Fight Night. The boxing world was changing and the video game industry along with it. The once heavyweight champ was about to face his toughest challenge yet. The shocking truth about Fight Night's demise reveals just how fragile even the mightiest franchises can be. Because let's be real, Fight Night was the king of the ring for years. It had the graphics, the gameplay, the star power. So when EA suddenly tapped out after Fight Night Champion in 2011, fans were left scratching their heads. I mean, what could possibly KO such a beloved series? Well, it turns out it was a perfect storm of issues. UFC was blowing up at the time, and EA saw dollar signs in mixed martial arts. So they shifted their focus to the UFC franchise, which left Fight Night on the ropes. And at the same time, boxing itself was struggling to find new stars. The sport that once gave us Joe Louis and Ricky Hatton was now in a slump. I mean, Mayweather and Pacquiao were still around, but Mayweather wasn't exactly rushing to be in video games without a fat paycheck. And here's where things get messy: licensing. In team sport games, you make a deal with the league and you're set. But boxing, each fighter is their own business. EA had to negotiate with dozens of individual boxers, managers, and promoters, so it was a logistical nightmare. The UFC was much easier to produce games for because Dana White owns everything, so getting a licensing deal done was much easier. Add to the fact that boxing's biggest names were aging out or retiring, and EA was stuck between paying big bucks for recognizable fighters or risking a game full of nobodies. But here's the kicker: while this is all going down, a whole generation of gamers who grew up with Fight Night were now entering their 20s and 30s. These folks had jobs, money money to spend and a ton of nostalgia for those nights spent trading virtual punches with friends. EA might have thought they were done with Fight Night, but Fight Night fans weren't done with it. You started to see Reddit threads pop up asking for a new Fight Night game, YouTube videos breaking down why the series needed to come back. Hell, there were even online petitions. It was like watching a fan base trying to will a game into existence through the sheer force of nostalgia. And you know what? All that noise might have actually made a difference, because even though Fight Night was down, it wasn't out. The series left such a mark that every boxing game since has been compared to it. It's good, but it's no Fight Night became a common phrase among reviewers and fans alike. So while Fight Night might have been absent from store shelves, its spirit still lived on, especially thanks to the fact that Fight Night Champion is still playable on the Xbox Game Pass. Fight Night, it set a bar so high that fans wouldn't settle for anything less. And in a weird way, that absence created a hunger that would eventually lead to some unexpected contenders stepping into the ring to try and claim Fight Night's vacant throne. But we're getting ahead of ourselves, because before any new challengers could emerge, boxing game fans had to endure a long, dark period, a time in which it seemed like their beloved genre of boxing games might have been down for the count. So what happens when your favorite game disappears? For boxing fans, it was like watching their beloved sport get KO'd in the first round. But here's the thing, this drought might have been the best thing to ever happen to boxing games. How? Well, this is where things get interesting. When Fight Night threw in the towel, it left a void bigger than Tyra Banks' forehead. Fans were left wandering the gaming landscape like punch-drunk boxers searching for something, anything, to just scratch that itch. It was like a whole part of gaming's culture had been erased overnight. Gamers tried to cope, but it wasn't pretty. Some kept their old consoles on life support, replaying Fight Night Champion until their controllers gave out. Others turned to modding, trying to Frankenstein boxing mechanics into other fighting games, but it was just a desperate attempt to fill the void, but nothing quite hit the mark. And those new boxing games that did come out, let's just say calling them boxing games would be generous. We got a steady stream of mobile titles that were about as satisfying as sex before marriage. I mean, sure, you could tap the screen to throw a punch, but was there strategy? Was there any depth? It just had flashy graphics and big promises, but the gameplay was flat and riddled with microtransactions. I mean, why the hell does a boxing game like Real Boxing 2 have a $10 a month subscription service? But here's where it gets wild. While console gamers were left high and dry, the mobile market was actually booming. Gamers were down so bad for a new boxing game that according to this app analysis site, Real Boxing 2 generates upwards of $60,000 a month in microtransaction sales. I think fans wanted something on console and PC, but every year, boxing fans would get their hopes up at E3 and other gaming events praying for an announcement that would never come. It was heartbreaking, to be honest. But all this disappointment and frustration, it was actually setting the stage for something bigger. See, while the big studios were sleeping on boxing games, a whole generation of indie developers were growing up. These were the kids who cut their teeth on Fight Night, who knew exactly what made those games special, and they were itching to step into the ring themselves. The boxing game drought created a hunger so intense that someone was bound to try and satisfy it. And when someone finally showed up, they came out swinging harder than prime Dante Wilder. But who was this mystery contender, and how did they manage to do what even EA couldn't? Well, this is where our story takes an unexpected turn, because sometimes the most unlikely underdogs end up being the ones who change the game.
For the count, this the fight of my life, this the time of my life. You wanna take my life, better be ready to fight. You wanna take my rights, better be ready to fight. My back against the wall, gotta be ready to fight. Stumble down and fall, gotta get back up and fight. Fight. Fight.
You remember those three kids who grew up playing Fight Night that I told you about earlier? Well, three brothers from Sheffield decided to do something wild. They took on the entire boxing game industry with no experience developing games. Crazy, right? When I first heard about Undisputed, it was originally called ESBC before they eventually rebranded. Now, I wasn't sure about this game at first, but I decided to keep an open mind once I saw these guys were not playing around. They started out by just working from their living room, and they were fueled by nothing but passion for boxing and gaming. So how did they even get started? To be honest, it wasn't pretty at first. they had to teach themselves everything from scratch. I'm talking game design, programming, the whole 9 yards. But here's the thing, their fresh perspective became their secret weapon. They weren't bound by industry conventions, so they could approach things differently. So how did they try to make Undisputed stand out? For starters, they went all in on realism. We're talking fluid movement and punch mechanics that were like the real deal. You gotta think like a real boxer, set up combinations, manage your stamina. It's the kind of depth that hardcore boxing fans have been craving for years. Now I know what you're thinking, sounds great, but how did they get all the fighter licenses? Well, this is where things get wild. These guys went directly to the boxing industry and secured individual contracts for each fighter. The audacity paid off. I guess they just kind of respected the hustle. And because of that, the roster in Undisputed launched with a stacked 95 total fighters, 83 of which are male and 12 are female. Steel City Interactive also knocked it out of the park with the community engagement. They brought fans into the process during the early access period, using player feedback to help refine the game. It's like they turned players into part of the dev team, which I'm sure the community enjoyed. But to be real, it hasn't been all smooth sailing. Some players complain about the AI behavior, and there's been some grumblings about missing features in the game like clinching. But the devs aren't running from the criticism. They're committed to ongoing updates and improvements. So what's the verdict on this game? Is Undisputed the real deal, or is it just another pretender trying to take the throne? At launch, they are charging $70 for this game. They're calling it a full boxing experience instead of just another boxing game. But how true is that? In this next portion of the video, I'm gonna dive deeper into my personal impressions of the game. Before we do, quick disclaimer. The following video is not a full review. This is just some general impressions of the game in its current state, as well as some general info for those in the market for a new boxing game. This game has plans to be frequently updated, which means the meta could change, so how I feel now may not be how I feel in the future. So feel free to take everything I'm about to say with a grain of salt, and with the disclaimer out of the way, here's everything you need to know before you install Undisputed. As stated earlier, Undisputed is a new boxing game available now on PC, PS5, and the Xbox Series. It launched with 95 fighters, but if you want all 95, you're gonna need to make sure you purchase the deluxe edition of the game, which currently retails for $70, as it includes the fighter pack, which has the bonus fighters. The main thing Undisputed is touting is it's the most realistic boxing experience on the market, which isn't hard to claim when you are the only one on the market. They claim to use motion capture tech for real-life movement, authentic boxing techniques and strategies, and innovative footwork mechanics. Now I'm just gonna go ahead and get it out of the way early. I'm not a big fan of this game, and I haven't been since I purchased it during the early access period. I was hoping after my 1-year hiatus when I originally uninstalled it on PC, when the full game came out and I returned, I was hoping that it was much better, but it's just not this. I do believe the game is better, but not by much. During the early access period, one of my biggest complaints was the optimization on PC. It was terrible. I mean, the frame rate was constantly dropping, which created an unfun experience. Boxing is all about timing your opponent, and it was hard to time someone when the game didn't work half the time. The good news is, though, I'm happy to report that the optimization issues have been handled and the game runs smoothly, but the bad news is that's about all I see different in the full version of the game. This game is janky, man. The best way I describe Undisputed as a game is when it's good, but when it's bad, it is bad. And I think that's because this is clearly an indie title with a tighter budget. And if you go into it with that mindset, I think there's some fun to be had here. But if your expectations are Fight Night Killer or anything close to that, you're gonna be severely disappointed. First off, the game modes are sparse. There's nothing to do in this game other than hop online and fight, basic exhibition matches, and the god-awful campaign. There's no real story mode here. It's just a bare bones campaign where you create a fighter and you fight through the ranks. And that wouldn't be too much of an issue if there was something to do besides shuffle through menus and fight in tournaments. This is a boxing game with no real training, mini games, or anything else to do in the story mode to help the player get better. All your character progression is through the menus, which gets boring very quickly. Add to the fact that there's no real story mode whatsoever, and it feels like you're playing a more glorified tech demo than a fully realized game. Now, to be clear, the game does feature tutorials, but I wouldn't expect too much from those. Also, they don't happen in the campaign, so that's something separate. For the people who want to learn via single player, it's going to be a lot of trial and error once you get the basics down. The meat and potatoes of this game is going to be the actual combat. Movement around the ring does feel really solid. I like the way players animate left to right, and I also like the extra options you're given in terms of how you can duck and sway punches. I love the little attention to details like when you push a fighter off you to create space, as well as the different fighting and blocking styles you're given access to. I just wish they were consistent with the little details. This is a boxing game that doesn't feature a clinch, and because of that, that enables a lot of bad behavior online. One of them being the abuse of the stamina system. It's like it doesn't matter in this game. People just spam power punches online, and I'm okay with that. Slugging should be a strategy. But my issue is, this game doesn't reward players enough for countering that style. You have to work way too hard to punish stupid shit they do online, and that's just not realistic. People will just swing with their head down like a caveman online, and you will bob and weave it, hit them with several jabs and counter hooks and uppercuts, and it doesn't matter half the time. You can bypass it. I'm not saying that it's not beatable, but what I am saying is there's not enough consequences for bad players. And the worst part is, there's a portion of this community that is very toxic. To them, the developers can do no wrong, and in my opinion, that's what's gonna kill this game if it does die. The community. Because the developers seem like good people who just want to make a good game, but if they can't get consistent feedback, then nothing will ever improve. I repeat, this is a boxing game that's riddled with spammers and it has no clinching. The average gamer is 35 years old, so when they come home from their 9 to 5, they want to play a fun, balanced game. Not everyone has time to sit on the game and learn to overcome a game's shortcomings, so when simple stuff like counter punishment against spammers isn't efficient enough, it's gonna turn some people off. All I'm asking is for some of you, the toxic side of the community, to think outside yourself for once instead of just shouting, "Get good." That being said, I do like how this game handles body work. In Fight Night, body punches were inconsistent, but in this game, they have dedicated buttons to body and power punches that act like modifiers. It takes a second to get used to, but once you master it, you will never be guessing whether your punches are going to go to the head or the body. Match that with mastering the angles, and you can pull off some cool stuff in this game. It's just hard to take this game seriously when it's plagued by bugs. This game has an issue with ghost punches. You will be completely out of range of your opponent, and you can still get hit by Danny Phantom. And because your hands might be down, you're now eating extra damage that you shouldn't have been eating in the first place. Yeah, come on. What you trying to do? Okay. I'm gonna respect that. You ain't gonna knock me out though. Yeah. You ain't got that dog in you. Come on, oh, brick. Oh, what? You didn't even connect with that. What the hell was that? What does this get? What? What the? Yeah, what's up? What is this game doing? Oh my God. This game, I don't even care that I knock him down. That was several ghost punches in a row. This game is awful. Now, remember how earlier I said you don't get rewarded for proper counter punching half the time? Well, here's an example of someone countering an online spammer, and the punch still connects even though his hands didn't. The lack of polish doesn't stop there. I mean, often matches are dull and boring because some of these arenas just lack sound effects. It creates awkward scenarios. The atmosphere of a title fight is missing in some of these places, which can mess with the immersion for the player. And then you just have silly glitches like this.
Shots. So if you throwing a body shot,
The knockdown punch we knew was coming.
with that.
I believe the punches still lack oomph to them as well. I mean, punches in a boxing game shouldn't be so inconsistent. Sometimes it feels like pillows are just hitting your opponent even when you're holding the power button. If they could amp up the brutality of the sport, I think that would make more people excited, as sometimes it feels like it takes far too long to knock someone out who's playing horribly. I wish the knockouts were more brutal too. When you hurt someone in Fight Night, you really felt it in the way they fall out. Most knockouts in this game sees the opponent just go to sleep in slow motion. No close-ups of the pain, no bone-crushing sounds. It just doesn't feel as rewarding. Then if you get knocked out, the mini game to get back up is god awful. It's difficult and clunky for no goddamn reason. And there's no voice chat in the online play. I want to talk shit to my opponent when throwing hands. That was half the fun of Fight Night. I don't want to sit in silence. Don't forget there's no crossplay either. I guess the good news is though, is a lot of the stuff is fixable, and the studio behind the game has been very transparent on social media with their communication. I think the two biggest things this game is going to face is the conflicting feedback from the community and its fight against time. Nowadays, new games are being released daily. Competition is stiff, so you gotta get your game correct out of the gate because a lot of people aren't gonna wait forever for these updates. It took 2 months, I repeat, 2 months in December for the first major update to be released, which included some bug fixes, new venues, stamina adjustments, and animations, but post-update, ghost punches still seem to be an issue. I mean, hit detection is still inconsistent and the game still has bugs and glitches everywhere. The game is just not in the best state. Having to wait 2 months after launch to get some basic balancing is gonna turn a lot of people off, and to be honest, they didn't even fix much. If they can't get simple tweaks out quickly, how long is it gonna take for every other problem? The Undisputed devs have to understand that between October and December 2024, several major games released that could take attention away from Undisputed. That includes the Silent Hill 2 remake, Diablo 4's Vessel of Hatred DLC, Metaphor ReFantasio, Dragon Ball Sparking Zero, Mario Party Jamboree, Sonic Shadows Generations, Black Ops 6, Dragon Age Veilguard, Mario and Luigi Brothership, Marvel Rivals, and Indiana Jones and the Great Circle. It's a lot of content to play besides Undisputed. Right now, this game is feeling like a 5 on a bad day and a 6 at its best. People are hurting for cash these days, so they can't buy every game. Nobody's trying to spend $70 on some mid. Some mid that doesn't have crossplay, so this game is likely to die quickly without it. I think this game would have done better if it launched at a discounted price of 20 to 40 bucks at retail, sort of how they did with the early access. They should have just kept the early access price for the retail as well. I mean, the hardcore boxing fans will be there, but you're gonna need more than that to maintain a healthy community. Polish and the little details in your single player modes will attract the casuals. Casuals matter because they could potentially turn into your new hardcore audience. So I'd say if you really want to play this game, I'd suggest waiting for a price drop. Otherwise, I think skipping it all together is another solid option. I don't think this game in its current state is gonna appeal to anyone besides people who are super thirsty for a boxing game. I mean, so thirsty they'll even accept mediocre. I think Undisputed has something here, but it's just not worth the price of entry they're asking for, and that's the bad news. The good news is that EA has a sudden interest in boxing games. After leaving Fight Night fans hanging for over a decade, rumors claim they're eyeing a comeback. For the longest, EA was too busy counting their EA Sports FC money to care about boxing games, but Undisputed might have woken up a sleeping giant. Those three brothers from Sheffield started making waves with their indie boxing games, and EA realized they might have left some money on the table. Here's the thing though, we might be waiting a while for this comeback. Rumors suggest EA's new boxing game might not hit our consoles until 2027 or 2028. Not to mention, this is not the same EA who made the previous Fight Night games. One of my concerns for the future of this Fight Night series, if they do make it, is monetization. If EA implements nickel and diming us into a boxing game, that's gonna be a major turnoff for everyone, including me. Now, some of you might be wondering, why the long wait? Well, making a boxing game ain't as easy as it used to be. EA's got to secure licenses for all the big name boxers, and that's no small feat. Many of the top fighters are already signed up for Undisputed too, which leaves EA with fewer options possibly. But don't count out EA just yet. They've still got some tricks up their sleeve. There are plenty of big names not tied to Undisputed. I mean, imagine stepping into the ring as Gervonta Davis or reliving the glory days with legends like Manny Pacquiao and Floyd Mayweather. Unlike Undisputed, EA has got the cash to make that happen, and they know how to put on a good show. So what's been the fan reaction to this news? It's been like a split decision. On one side, you've got the diehard Fight Night fans losing their mind with excitement. They're ready to jump back into the ring right away. But on the other side, you've got some skeptics. They're side-eyeing EA, wondering if this is just another cash grab, and I think that's a fair criticism. There's no reason to trust EA. Just like there's no reason to trust Ubisoft. These days, the French game maker can't stay out of the headlines for all the wrong reasons. Recently, they released a game called Star Wars Outlaws that tanked their company's share prices down to just $2 a share. Some are even worried that they might file for bankruptcy soon. And if you want to know why, click the card on the screen to learn more about the rise and fall of Ubisoft games.